Snow slammed sideways across the Wyoming mountains when Daniel Brooks hit the brakes. His German Shepherd Max was growling. Something was wrong. In the glare of the headlights, Daniel saw her, a one-legged woman, collapsed in the snow blood, staining the white-ground eyes wide with terror. Before Daniel could speak, Max jumped from the truck and stood over her, shielding her from the wind, as if his life depended on it. "She's not alone," the woman whispered, her voice breaking. "They're still out there." Daniel hadn't planned to save anyone that night, but as the storm closed in and unfamiliar footprints appeared behind them, he realized this wasn't an accident. And leaving her there would mean signing her death sentence. If you believe compassion can rewrite destiny, like the video, subscribe for more stories, and comment where you're watching. See where this story will go. Winter smothered the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming beneath a blizzard so dense it erased the horizon, turning road forest and sky into a single moving wall of white. Daniel Brooks drove slowly, both hands locked on the steering wheel of his aging pickup, as wind slammed snow sideways across the windshield. At 45, he had learned the discipline of patience the hard way through years of isolation that had stripped excess from his life and left only what was necessary. He stood 6 feet tall, once broad and powerful, now leaner from long seasons of solitude. His face was angular and weather-cut, a permanent stubble shadowing a tight jawline. Gray eyes, sharp and distant, stared through the storm, as if still scanning for threats that no longer had names. His dark brown hair brushed the back of his neck, silver, threading his temples like frost that never fully melted. He wore the same clothes he always did in winter. A heavy, cracked brown leather jacket, pulled tight against the cold, a red and navy flannel beneath it, faded jeans, rubbed pale at the knees, thick leather boots built for snow, and a gray wool scarf wrapped twice around his throat. They were not chosen for style, only for survival. The cabin he lived in sat miles behind him, now hidden deep in the timber, a former hunting shack he had repaired just enough to keep the cold out and the world at a distance. Daniel did not miss people, or at least that was what he told himself. Silence had become familiar, and familiarity had become safety. In the back seat, Max shifted. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, full-grown and powerful, with a thick black and tan coat dusted white by snow that slipped in every time Daniel opened the door. Max's ears were upright, his posture rigid, but controlled the way it always was when something unsettled him. He was not a restless dog. He had been trained once long ago before Daniel withdrew from the world, and that training lived deep in his bones. When Max moved, it was never without reason. Daniel felt it before he saw it, the subtle change in the dog's breathing, the low vibration in his chest. Max growled. The sound was quiet, restrained, but it cut through the howl of the storm like a blade. Daniel's foot slammed the brake instinctively. The truck skidded, tires fighting for grip, before stopping at a crooked angle across what remained of the mountain road. Snow swirled in the headlights, revealing nothing at first but chaos. Then something moved. At the edge of the light, a figure collapsed forward, disappearing into the drift. Daniel's pulse spiked, old instincts snapping awake despite years of disuse. He shoved the door open, and the wind hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Snow crusted instantly along his jacket and beard as he stepped out. Max was already gone, leaping from the truck and landing hard in the snow. He did not bark. He ran straight toward the fallen figure and stopped, planting himself firmly between the body and the wind, his broad frame taking the brunt of the storm. Daniel moved closer, boots sinking deep with every step. What he saw tightened his chest. The woman was an adult, likely in her early 30s, tall but painfully thin now that exhaustion had hollowed her frame. She lay on her side, one leg bent beneath her, the other ending above the knee in torn fabric where her prosthetic should have been. Her coat hung open, its zipper, broken, exposing layers soaked through. Dark hair, blonde, maybe once golden, clung to her face in frozen strands. Her skin was pale beneath the red rawness of cold lips cracked and blue at the edges. Blood stained the snow beneath her hands, vivid against the white. Her eyes fluttered open as Daniel crouched, revealing a sharp, frightened blue that struggled to focus. There was intelligence there, and fear sharpened by more than the cold. "It's okay," Daniel said, though his voice sounded foreign to his own ears. He had not spoken aloud to another person in days, maybe weeks. "You're safe." The lie tasted bitter even as he said it. Max remained unmoving, his body angled protectively, head low, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the headlights. Snow piled along his back, but he did not shake it off. His attention was fixed outward, not on the woman. Daniel noticed it then. The tracks. They were not animal prints. Heavy boot marks circled the area half filled with fresh snow, but still visible enough to tell a story. Someone had been here, recently, and they had walked away. The woman's fingers twitched, grasping weakly at Max's fur, as if anchoring herself to something real. Her voice came out hoarse, barely louder than the wind. "Please, don't leave me." Daniel swallowed. Leaving had once been his specialty. He wrapped his scarf tighter and reached for her wrist, checking for a pulse. Weak, but there. Too weak. Hypothermia was already taking hold. Max let out a low, warning growl, his ears snapping toward the tree line. Daniel followed his gaze, heart pounding. The forest stood silent, dark shapes bending under the storm, offering no answers. The woman's eyes locked onto Daniel's face, panic flaring despite her fading strength. Her lips moved again, forming words that barely survived the wind. They're still... She coughed, blood flecking the snow. "They're still here." Daniel froze, the meaning settling heavier than the storm itself. Whoever had left her to die had not gone far. Snow closed in around them, erasing the road behind his truck and the life he had chosen to hide within. For the first time in years, Daniel Brooks understood that the past had not stayed buried in the mountains with him. It had followed him into the storm, and it was watching. The blizzard thickened as night settled over the Wind River Mountains, pressing darkness and cold down onto the narrow road like a living weight. Daniel Brooks drove, with his jaw-clenched eyes fixed ahead as the windshield wipers fought a losing battle against ice. The heater roared at full blast, yet the cab still felt cold, as if winter itself had climbed inside with them. He kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other gripping the edge of the seat whenever the truck slid. He had driven these mountains for years and trusted his instincts more than the road signs now buried under snow. What unsettled him was not the storm, but the fragile human presence breathing beside him, reminding him how long it had been since he'd allowed another life this close to his own. The woman lay across the bench seat, wrapped in Daniel's spare coat, and a blanket he'd kept behind the seat for emergencies he never expected to involve people. Her name was Emily Carter. She had managed to say it through chattering teeth when Daniel lifted her into the truck, her voice thin but firm, clinging to identity, as if it were the last thing the storm hadn't stolen. Emily was 32, though exhaustion and pain had aged her expression. She was tall, with a slender build that spoke of long hikes and physical endurance now reduced by injury and cold. Her blonde hair, normally cut just past her shoulders, was tangled, and damp strands plastered to her pale face. Freckles dusted her cheeks beneath the grime and frost, and her blue eyes, sharp, observant eyes, kept flicking toward the rear window with raw animal fear. Max lay pressed against her side, his large body radiating heat. The German shepherd did not relax, not even inside the cab. His head rested near Emily's ribs, ears still angled forward, amber eyes tracking every shadow beyond the glass. Snow melted along his thick coat, darkening the black fur along his spine. He was 6 years old, strong and disciplined, a dog shaped by training and loyalty rather than affection alone. When Emily's shaking worsened, Max shifted closer, placing his head gently against her chest, grounding her breathing. "I didn't crash," Emily whispered suddenly, her voice hoarse but urgent. "I wasn't careless." Daniel glanced at her, then back to the road. He had not asked, but he listened. "They were watching me," she continued, swallowing hard. "I was photographing the ridge, just trees, wildlife. That's my job. I don't trespass. But I saw something I wasn't supposed to." Her fingers tightened in Max's fur. "They followed me. When the storm hit, they didn't help. They waited." Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. He believed her, not because of the words alone, but because of the tracks he'd seen, and because Max still hadn't settled. Dogs knew fear when it was real. Emily turned her head, slowly studying Daniel's face, as if measuring whether he was real or another threat. She noticed the lines etched deep around his eyes, the scars weather, and time left behind the controlled stillness of a man used to danger. "You live up here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Alone, Daniel hesitated. With him, a faint, humorless smile touched Emily's lips. "Lucky." The truck lurched as the road narrowed, a fallen pine looming ahead, its massive trunk blocking the descent toward town. Daniel slowed headlights, revealing what he'd already suspected. The pass was closed by nature itself. Going down the mountain was no longer an option. Emily saw it too. Panic surged, sharp and immediate. "We can't stop, they'll find us." Daniel exhaled slowly. Years ago, situations like this would have felt familiar. Command decisions, risk assessments. Now they felt heavier, personal. "We're not going down," he said evenly. "The road's gone. Then where?" Her voice cracked fear, threatening to undo the composure she clung to. Daniel turned the wheel, guiding the truck away from the blocked pass and onto a narrower trail that disappeared into trees. "My cabin," he said. "It's close." The word cabin felt larger than it was. To Daniel, it represented retreat, distance, a place where the world could not reach him. Bringing someone there felt like breaking a rule he'd written to survive. As the truck crawled uphill, Emily's breathing steadied slightly, warmth and exhaustion pulling at her consciousness. Max stayed pressed against her, his presence constant, deliberate. Every so often he lifted his head and sniffed the air, a low sound rumbling in his chest when the wind shifted. Emily's eyes closed, then snapped open again. "My leg," she murmured. "I lost it years ago. Car accident. I learned how to adapt. I don't need saving." Her jaw tightened. "But tonight, I couldn't outrun them." Daniel said nothing. He knew what it meant to rebuild after something took a part of you. He also knew how easily strength could be mistaken for invulnerability. The cabin lights came into view at last, faint and steady against the storm. Daniel felt an unexpected tension coil in his chest. This place had been his shield. Now it would be a refuge for someone else. He parked close to the door and killed the engine. Silence rushed in, broken only by wind battering the walls. Max lifted his head, scanning. Daniel opened the door and stepped into the storm again, circling to lift Emily carefully. She was lighter than she looked, her body trembling despite the warmth. As he carried her toward the cabin, he felt the weight of choice settle fully on him. This was no longer about avoiding the past. It was about facing what followed him into the snow. Behind them, Max paused at the edge of the clearing, staring back into the trees, before finally stepping inside, never once lowering his guard. Night pressed hard against the cabin as the blizzard circled the clearing. snow hissing against the logs and swallowing every sound beyond the walls. The cabin was small, built of rough-hewn timber and stubborn practicality, a place Daniel Brooks had shaped to keep the world out rather than invite it in. Firelight flickered along the walls, revealing shelves lined with tools, old maps, and a life pared down to essentials. Emily Carter sat on the edge of the narrow couch, wrapped in blankets, her breath finally steadying as warmth crept back into her limbs. The loss of her prosthetic left her posture slightly unbalanced, but she held herself with quiet determination. Shoulders squared despite exhaustion. Her skin had regained a hint of color freckles, visible again beneath grime and dried blood. Blonde hair hung loose around her face, damp and tangled, but her blue eyes were sharp now, alert, the eyes of someone who observed the world for a living and did not miss details easily. Daniel stood near the stove, his leather jacket hanging from a peg flannel sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with lean muscle. The fire's glow cut deep lines into his angular face, emphasizing the tension he kept locked behind discipline. He listened without interrupting gray eyes, steady as if still on watch. Years of avoiding people had not dulled his ability to read them. If anything, it had sharpened it. Max lay on the floor between them, a solid presence, stretched long and watchful. The German shepherd's head was up ears, pivoting with each gust of wind. His amber eyes reflected the firelight as he stared toward the windows, hackles lifting slightly whenever the forest creaked. Snow melted into dark patches along his thick coat, steam rising faintly from his back. He had not relaxed since they arrived, and Daniel trusted that more than words. "I didn't know what I was looking at first," Emily said quietly. Her voice was steadier now, but something inside it trembled. "I was shooting elk tracks along the ridge. I follow patterns. Light movement. That's how you find the story." She paused, fingers tightening around the mug Daniel had pressed into her hands. "Then I saw cages, hidden under tarps, and trucks that didn't belong out there." Daniel's jaw set. He had seen enough of the mountains to know what didn't belong. "They were moving animals," Emily continued. "Wolves, maybe bears. I don't know how many. I raised my camera before I thought about it. I always do." A bitter smile crossed her face. "That's when they saw me." She described them without names. Only impressions burned into memory. Heavy coats, broad shoulders, men who moved with confidence born of routine cruelty. One had a beard thick and untrimmed, his eyes cold and assessing. Another limped slightly, favoring his right leg, but carried himself like someone used to intimidation. They were not reckless amateurs. They were organized, methodical, dangerous. "They didn't chase me," Emily said, voice dropping. "They followed. Quietly. When the storm hit, my truck slid. They came out of the trees like they'd been waiting for it." She swallowed. "They smashed my camera first." Daniel felt something old and sharp twist in his chest. Evidence destroyed, control asserted. "They could have killed me," she whispered. "But they didn't need to. They took my prosthetic and tossed it into the ravine like it was nothing. Then they left." Her eyes lifted to his, steady but haunted. They knew the mountain would finish the job. Silence settled heavy in the cabin. The fire popped sparks, snapping upward. Daniel stared into the flames, the words sinking deeper than he wanted to allow. For years he had convinced himself that retreat was neutrality, that isolation absolved him from the consequences of other people's choices. But this was different. This was not an accident of nature. This was harm deliberate and calculated, bleeding into the wilderness he'd chosen as refuge. "This isn't just about getting you through the night," Daniel said finally. His voice was low, controlled, but something resolute edged its way through. They're operating out here. That makes it my problem. Emily studied him closely. You don't owe me anything. Daniel met her gaze. I know. Max growled softly, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. His head turned sharply toward the window facing the tree line. Daniel's attention snapped with it. The forest beyond the glass was a wall of darkness, snow swirling in relentless motion. At first there was nothing. Then Daniel saw it, a subtle shift, a shape where no shape should be. Snow fell differently there, disturbed by movement. Max rose to his feet, muscles taut, tail stiff. He let out another low growl, deeper this time, a warning rather than a question. Emily followed their focus, fear tightening her features. They're close, she said, certainty replacing speculation. I felt it before too, like being watched. Daniel moved without hurry, crossing the cabin to check the locks, his movements economical and practiced. He retrieved a flashlight, set it by the door, then glanced toward the old rifle mounted above the mantel, its presence a reminder of choices he had hoped to leave behind. The responsibility he had buried beneath years of solitude rose to the surface, heavy and undeniable. He had not come to the mountains to be a guardian, but the mountains had brought something to him anyway. Max's growl intensified, teeth just visible now as he stared unblinking into the storm. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that did not belong to nature. Alone, a muffled crunch, distant, but deliberate. Daniel extinguished the lamp, plunging the cabin into shadow, save for the fire's glow. He placed a steady hand on Max's back, grounding himself as much as the dog. Someone's out there, Emily whispered. Daniel nodded once. I know. And as the snow continued to fall, burying tracks and secrets alike, Daniel understood that whatever he had tried to leave behind in the mountains had found him again. The storm tightened its grip around the cabin wind, driving snow against the walls, as if testing for weakness. Daniel Brooks stood just inside the door, listening. Years of isolation had sharpened his awareness in ways silence never erased. Beneath the roar of the blizzard he caught it again, the deliberate crunch of boots compressing fresh snow, slow and measured circling. Not wildlife, not the storm settling. Men. The same kind of men who believed distance and weather could bury what they did. Emily Carter sat on the couch, blankets pulled tight around her shoulders. The warmth had returned color to her face, but tension carved sharp lines into her features. Her blonde hair was braided loosely now to keep it from tangling, revealing a long, narrow face, dusted with freckles, and a jaw set with stubborn resolve. She tried to remain still, but her fingers trembled as they tightened around the edge of the cushion. She had survived losing a leg, survived rebuilding her life with patience and grit, but fear, like this being hunted, cut deeper than pain. Max stood in front of her, unmoving. The German shepherd's posture was rigid, protective, his powerful frame positioned between Emily and the windows. His lips curled slightly as a low growl rolled from his chest, steady and unwavering. Snow clung to his fur where he had pressed against the door earlier, his amber eyes reflecting firelight and something sharper focus. This was not panic. This was purpose. Daniel moved slowly, deliberately, resisting the pull of old instincts that screamed for speed and dominance. He had worn a uniform once, followed orders, measured his worth by outcomes that left scars no one saw. He had come to the mountains to escape that man. Tonight, escape was no longer an option. A shadow passed across the frosted window. Then a knock, firm, confident, almost polite. Evening, a male voice called through the storm. We're just looking for our friend. Daniel recognized the tone instantly. Calm, controlled, a man accustomed to being obeyed. He pictured him without seeing him, broad shoulders under a heavy coat, beard, untrimmed eyes, calculating. The leader Emily had described. "There's no one here," Daniel replied evenly, his voice carrying through the door without rising. A pause, then a short laugh. "That's a shame," the man said, "because she belongs to us." Emily's breath caught. Max's growl deepened. Daniel felt the weight of every year he'd spent hiding press down on him. He understood now that solitude had not protected him from the world. It had only delayed this moment. He glanced back at Emily. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. It wasn't a command. It was a promise. The door rattled as someone tested the handle. Another voice joined in, rougher, impatient. "Storm's on our side. No one's coming." Daniel's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to the door, positioning himself squarely between it and the room. He was not thinking like a soldier now. There were no formations, no missions. There was only right and wrong. And the line was clear. The door slammed inward under a heavy kick. Cold air exploded into the cabin carrying snow and silhouettes. 3 men forced their way inside, boots tracking white across the floorboards. The first was the bearded man Daniel had imagined, tall and thick, through the chest eyes, sharp beneath a wool cap. A scar cut across his left cheek, pale against wind-burned skin. Behind him came a second man with a noticeable limp, his movements jerky, his gaze darting with nervous energy. The third was younger, thinner eyes, wide and uncertain, his grip on a flashlight too tight. "Easy," the leader said, raising one gloved hand when he saw Max. "We don't want trouble." Max lunged forward a step, teeth, bared a warning that vibrated through the room. Emily flinched, but did not scream. Daniel placed a hand on Max's shoulder, steadying him, without breaking eye contact with the men. "You left her to die," Daniel said. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion, and that made it more dangerous. The leader's mouth twitched. "Mountain makes the rules." "No," Daniel replied. "People do." The blizzard howled louder, as if punctuating the moment. The younger man shifted uneasily. "Boss, maybe we should shut up," the leader snapped. He took a step forward. "You're alone up here. You don't know who you're dealing with." Daniel did know, and that knowledge brought a strange calm. He moved when the leader did, faster than expectation, using the cramped space and uneven footing to his advantage. The fight was chaotic and brutal, shaped by darkness, fear, and the storm screaming just beyond the walls. Furniture overturned. A lamp shattered. Emily pressed herself back against the couch, heart-hammering eyes tracking every movement. Max exploded into action, with controlled ferocity, intercepting the limping man as he tried to circle wide. The German shepherd moved with trained precision, forcing the man back with snarls and snapping teeth, never biting unless necessary, his body a living barrier. The leader recovered quickly, swinging hard, but Daniel absorbed the blow and stayed upright. Pain flared, old injuries screaming, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was present, alive. When it ended suddenly. The men retreated, dragging each other back into the storm curses, swallowed by wind. The door slammed shut again, silence crashing down in their wake. Daniel stood still, chest-heaving hands, trembling not from fear, but from release. He looked at Max, who returned to Emily's side, instantly checking her with a soft whine before settling in front of her once more. Emily's eyes shone with unshed tears. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Daniel wiped blood from his knuckles, shaking his head. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." As the storm continued to rage, Daniel Brooks understood something with painful clarity. Hiding had never healed him. Only choosing to stand had. Morning came quietly over the Wind River Mountains, the blizzard finally loosening its grip as pale light filtered through thinning clouds and softened the sharp edges of snowdrifts around the cabin. Daniel Brooks stood near the window, watching steam rise from the ground where winter had begun to retreat. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, a tall, lean man with a weathered, angular face, gray eyes no longer scanning for threats, but resting on the present moment. The bruises on his knuckles had darkened overnight, a dull reminder of the choice he had made. For years, he had believed survival meant staying invisible, letting the world move past him without interference. Now, as the mountains exhaled and the storm passed, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, relief mixed with resolve. Emily Carter sat at the small wooden table, her posture steadier than it had been the night before. Wrapped in clean clothes Daniel had found in storage, she looked more like the woman she had been before the mountain tried to erase her. Tall and slim with sun-freckled skin and blonde hair tied back in a practical knot, she moved with careful efficiency despite the absence of her prosthetic. Her eyes were clear, focused the eyes of a photographer who framed the world through patience and truth. Fear still lingered there, but it no longer ruled her. Max lay at Daniel's feet, his large body relaxed for the first time since the storm began. The German shepherd's black and tan coat caught the morning light, amber eyes half-lidded but alert ears twitching at distant sounds. He was 6 years old, disciplined and loyal, shaped by training and reinforced by instinct. When Emily shifted, Max lifted his head, briefly checking on her before settling again. He had decided she belonged. The sound of engines cut through the quiet an hour later. Daniel stepped onto the porch as 2 sheriff's vehicles emerged along the clearing's edge, tires crunching over melting snow. Sheriff Tom Harlan led the way, a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, his lined face marked by years of weather and responsibility. His mustache was neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp but not unkind. Behind him walked Deputy Lisa Monroe Younger, her dark hair pulled into a tight braid beneath her hat, movements efficient and observant. Daniel met them halfway, his stance calm, unguarded. "She's inside," he said simply. Emily spoke with them for a long time, her voice steady, as she recounted what she had seen and survived. She handed over the remaining memory cards she'd hidden in her jacket lining images of cages, trucks, men moving through the forest with practiced ease. Sheriff Harlan listened without interruption, his expression hardening with each detail. "We've been tracking rumors like this for years," he said finally. "This is the first solid proof." Daniel watched from the doorway as the weight of responsibility shifted from his shoulders to theirs. He felt no urge to explain himself, no need for recognition. What mattered was that Emily would leave alive, and the mountains would no longer shelter cruelty unnoticed. By afternoon, the vehicles were gone, tracks leading back toward civilization. The cabin stood quiet again, but it felt different now, less like a bunker and more like a threshold. Emily gathered her things, slowly pausing often to look around, as if committing the space to memory. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped," she said, meeting Daniel's gaze. Gratitude softened her features, but it did not diminish her strength. "You didn't have to." Daniel nodded once. "I know." She smiled, then, small but genuine. "I'll be back," she added. "Not to hide, to finish what I started." He believed her. When Emily finally left with the rescue team, the clearing felt briefly empty, the echo of her presence lingering like warmth after a fire dies down. Daniel stood on the porch as the sun dipped lower, snow melting steadily around his boots. He realized then that he had no desire to leave, no urge to retreat deeper into solitude. Wyoming had become more than an escape. It had become a place of decision. Max padded out beside him, sitting at his heel, steady and silent. Daniel rested a hand on the dog's broad head, fingers sinking into thick fur. The mountains stretched before them, no longer hostile, simply vast. Winter had not ended. Snow still crowned the peaks, and cold would return. But something within Daniel had shifted, irreversible and necessary. He was no longer a shadow passing through the world. He was present. And that he understood was how survival truly began. At the end of this story, we are reminded that miracles do not always arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through a man who chooses not to look away, through a loyal dog who refuses to abandon the weak, through a moment when fear is met with courage. Perhaps this is how God works most often, not by removing the storm, but by placing the right soul beside us in the storm. In our daily lives, we all face winters of our own loneliness, regret, exhaustion, or pain. We hide behind routine. This story asks us a simple question. When we see suffering, will we pass by, or will we stop? Faith is not only found in prayer, but in action. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach those who are struggling. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you through every storm.